but we'll see. But anyway, so I wanted to do this because I feel like these types of things is just easier to kind of like mass address like common questions or common common inquiries that I've been seeing in the law school application, like kind of sphere, the internet sphere. Like usually like my assistants handle social media for the most part, but sometimes I do see like common or regular questions or like questions we get through email or questions that come in like on Instagram or on TikTok or different things along those lines, or just what people are worried about or what people are thinking about. And so it's just easier for me to kind of do these types of things or do these videos a little bit to kind of talk about what's going on or shed some more color on answers to people's questions. Cause obviously I can't go through and answer every single person individually. So this video, I'm going to be talking about the fall 2026 law school application cycle, specifically some big, what I feel like is misunderstandings or kind of like, should I do this? Shouldn't I do this? Why does this matter? Does this matter? Type of thing. And what actually is important for your fall 2026 law school application cycle. So I'm going to start off first and foremost with some of the biggest kind of like mistakes or no-nos that I see in the fall 2026 law school application cycle. And so the first one that I see all the time is people saying like, oh, I'm taking the June LSAT. Should I wait? Like, or should I wait to start? Or I'm not taking the LSAT till August. So should I wait until then? And the reason why this is like just one of the biggest law school application mistakes that I see is because how you have to envision the process, it's not like you're envisioning the process as here is the LSAT, number one, and then over here is everything else, which is essentially how a lot of people are treating it when they're saying, but I'm not taking the LSAT until June, so I shouldn't so should I be starting? So should I do anything? Like, yeah, you should, right? You shouldn't be waiting to take the LSAT to start your application process. Like everything goes together, and that includes your LSAT. And so the reason why you don't want to wait until June or until August or until you take the LSAT or until you get your LSAT score back to start your application process is essentially because how you have to think about it is, let's say you're like what a lot of people have been saying, because I saw this comment, like literally, I'm not even joking, like 50 times, or it comes in the email or whatever. If you're taking the June LSAT, you don't want to wait to start your application process until after that June LSAT score comes out, because I don't exactly know when it comes out, but it probably comes out at the end of June, because like that LSAT is usually like the first-ish week of June, like June 5th through 8th or 9th or somewhere around there. So your score would come out at the end of June. Now, let's just say for the purposes of this video, you take your LSAT in June, your score comes out the end of June, and you're not happy with your score. If you're not happy with your score in June, you know what you're going to do? You're going to say, well, got to keep LSAT studying, got to prepare for the August test or got to prepare for the September test. And now you're kind of double behind, because now not only are you probably going to increase your LSAT studying or pick up your LSAT studying because you weren't happy with your June score, but now you also haven't begun picking who's going to be your recommenders. You haven't decided if you have any weaknesses that need to be mitigated. You haven't started brainstorming your application materials. You haven't chosen law schools according to your goals. You haven't outlined any application materials. You have literally done nothing, because the entire time, the entire previous 6 months, January to June, all you were doing was saying, I'm just going to wait till I get my LSAT score back, and then I'm going to start everything else. Essentially what that is doing, or what you're saying there, is you are going to be completely satisfied 100% with your LSAT score in June. So once you take your June LSAT, you have then from June all the way through September, when applications open, to then work on everything else. And the reality is that majority of people are not happy with their first LSAT score. Majority of people take the LSAT more than once. And majority of people, and I'm also going to talk about this a little bit too, study for the LSAT for 9 to 12 months. Actually, that one's not true. Majority of people, I'm not going to say study for the LSAT for 9 to 12 months, but people who I have seen who have performed well on the LSAT, on average, they study for the LSAT for 9 to 12 months. So if you're taking that into consideration, what it usually ends up meaning is you need to be studying for the LSAT for a good amount of hours, but slowly and incrementally doing other pieces, other things in your application process at the same time. And that's what people like don't realize. And that's why they end up falling behind the 8 ball, and then it's coming application time, and then all of a sudden it's December and nothing is ready, and then they end up applying in January late in the cycle, or they end up deciding to push a cycle. Now again, there's absolutely nothing wrong with deciding to wait a cycle, and I tell my clients when I think they should wait a cycle, but because you're still relatively early in the cycle, right, because it's March, you have enough time to actually map out what your cycle should look like and what your cycle can look like, right? So that's just the kind of the biggest mistake that I see people talking about, or people asking, or people making is, should I wait until June? Or should I wait until my LSAT score comes out? And again, like I just kind of literally ran it down to you as to why you shouldn't. Now, don't take that to mean as like, you're putting 15 hours into LSAT studying and 15 hours into building your application materials and 15 hours on application prep. That's not what that means. The reason, and this is actually the second thing that people kind of make a big mistake on, is you aren't treating this application process like a sprint, right? It's not, and look, my mic is like making my shirt fall down. It's not 15 hours of everything all at once. That's not what it is. That's a surefire way to burn out. That's a surefire way to burn out, especially if you work full time, especially if you have other things going on in your life, in your career, whatever it may be. The purpose of starting early in the cycle is because you can do 2 hours this week, and maybe this week is 8 hours, and maybe this week is like 9 hours, and maybe another week is 10 hours, right? Maybe you skip a week, or maybe you skip 2 weeks. The purpose of it is so that you are mapping out what is actually realistic according to your schedule, right? And so maybe sometimes that's like, I'm going to do 10 hours of LSAT study time, but then this next week, I can do an hour of trying to map out my law school goals. And maybe in 2 weeks, I can add in and start reaching out to my recommenders and building up those relationships with them. And then maybe in a couple of weeks, I can start networking and getting my name recognized at schools, or gathering information from schools by attending their events, right? So it's literally a marathon. You're adding in and doing these things piece by piece. Maybe it's 30 minutes one week. Maybe it's an hour one week. Maybe it's 2 hours another week, right? It's not like 15 hours all the time every single week. And I was just telling one of my clients this in my community, my Greats coaching community, because she shared her LSAT study schedule with me in the community, and it was 25 hours. And I was like, this is too much. I was like, this is too much. You are going to burn out if you are studying 25 hours of LSAT studying every single week. It doesn't need to be that much, right? Make sure you're tracking your progress, is what we do in my community. Make sure you're tracking your progress, tracking your hours. And if need be, as we get closer to your LSAT test time, we will adjust as necessary. But right now, you're not doing these crazy hours. It's incremental advances. It's working on things piece by piece. And those are the people who have the most success. Those are the people who have the most success, because when the applications open up and they're applying early in the cycle, everything was meticulously put together. Everything fits together holistically, right? They know who their recommenders are, and their recommenders complement what they're writing about in their application materials. They've scored as good as they could possibly score on the LSAT, right? Everything works together meticulously because they were working on it over a period of time. It's not this mad rush that people seem to make it out to be. Okay, so that's actually the perfect segue into the next thing here that a lot of people fail to do, and they just fail to view the application process holistically, right? So what I mean by that is, what a lot of people end up doing is they end up putting so much emphasis on the LSAT that they neglect everything else, and then they're really disappointed with their results. And this happened to a couple of my clients who applied for fall 2024 and then came to me as reapplicants for fall 2025 because they were confused about like what happened in the fall 2024 cycle. And now there's so much things that I can say here, but what I want you to understand is, if you have big law goals, like you guys know, I work full time in big law. I interviewed at pretty much all the top big law firms when I was in law school. If you want to do federal clerkships, if you want to be at a top law school, if those are your goals, understand that those law schools care about more than just your LSAT score. And let me make this as clear as possible. If you are looking at a school that is receiving 7,000 applications, 8,000 applications for 200 spots, yeah, they're going to be picky. There are going to be people with 172s and 176s that get denied. And yes, it happens. Like, yes, it happens because again, those schools, when they're getting thousands of applications and there's 200 spots, 300 spots, it's more than just your numbers because there's probably, let's just assume conservatively, if there's 7,000 applicants, 10% is 700. Let's assume conservatively 5% of those people meet their LSAT threshold, right? That's still 350 applicants right there. That's still 350 applicants. And when I say meet their LSAT threshold, I mean just like, okay, here's a band of which the schools are willing to review applicants from, right? Again, we're just talking hypotheticals here, throwing out random numbers. But again, when you're looking at schools like that, that's why more than just your numbers come into play when you're aiming for these top law schools. I have a couple of clients who came to me as law students with LSAT scores in the high 170s, get rejected from multiple T14s, and they were confused as to why. And I have to explain this to them. And one of my clients actually put it perfectly. She was interviewing at a T5 law school, and the admissions counselor said directly to her, if we only cared about numbers, a computer could do our job. And that's just like the most basic way I can put it. Now, you shouldn't take from what I'm saying as like your LSAT doesn't matter. It does. Your LSAT is the most important thing. It is the most important thing. But that doesn't mean that everything else doesn't also matter. Okay? And that's where people seem to kind of like, fall by the wayside. Like, again, especially if these are your goals. If these aren't your goals, then this probably isn't for you. But if top law schools are your goals, scholarship are your goals, big law, federal clerkships, judge, academia, all those kinds of things, everything matters. And you have to make yourself stand out because you have to show these law schools that you deserve to be at their law school. And there's tons of different ways to do that. But that is, again, like one of the biggest mistakes that I see all the time is essentially people kind of just forgetting about everything else and maybe ignoring red flags that they may have in their application. And I'll just give you an example of one that literally came to my mind, like as I'm talking. So one of my clients, she was a reapplicant. She was one of the ones who applied in 2024 and came to me in 2025. And she had strong scores. Like she had a mid 160s, and I believe her GPA was maybe a 3.6 or 3.7. So strong scores. And the highest ranking school she got into was Fordham. Again, and Fordham is a fantastic school. Like Fordham is a fantastic school, but she expected to do better given her scores. And when I reviewed her application materials, it was very obvious to me, more than likely, obviously I can't say with 100% certainty, but just looking at her materials and recognizing poor writing when I see it, I'm just like, there's probably other applicants that had much stronger materials than you. And so when you're already a borderline applicant, you're probably not going to get admitted, right? And so that's obviously like a little bit more of a drastic example. But again, when you're looking at the law school application cycle and you're looking at top law schools, you really do want to present yourself to be the best applicant that you can be in all aspects, right? And so put the emphasis on everything, right? And again, that just goes back to my first point on starting early, treating it like a marathon. Make sure you have a schedule. Make sure you're like, okay, at this point in time, I'm going to slowly start choosing my law schools correctly based on my goals. Too many people choose their law schools randomly. And I'm not even going to knock anyone here because y'all, that was me. Like when I was applying to law school, I chose it based on like, I don't want to live in the cold. Okay. But that's not how you do it. You need to choose it based on your goals. You need to choose it like safety, fit, reach. And it needs to be like very meticulously done. You're looking at the employment numbers. You're looking at everything. And that it's like, so like taking time out to choose your law schools appropriately. So many different things that you want to be slowly adding in and doing as you're going through your law school application process. Okay, so the next thing that a lot of people do that really they just shouldn't do is they underestimate the amount of time they need to submit a strong law school application. So there's going to be a full YouTube video coming this week on, I forgot what it's called, but if you're subscribed and you have notifications, you'll get it. But there's going to be a full YouTube video coming this week on just like the fall 2026 stuff, like usual YouTube video stuff. But A lot of people underestimate one, the amount of time they need to study for the LSAT. I already talked about that. Like the most successful applicants I have seen studied from 9 to 12 months. But second, the writing, right? And that's because the writing piece, it's not just writing. You are not just jumping in and writing application materials. That is not what you are doing. You need to brainstorm. You need to outline, and then you need to make sure you are writing about the appropriate topics that showcase you as a strong applicant. Just because you went through 10 different things in your life doesn't mean all 10 of those things need to be in your application materials, okay? You need to pick what is going to be best. You need to pick what is going to be cohesive and make you stand out to admissions counselors. And ideally, all of these things fit together, right? So when you're writing your application materials, you are telling the story. And that's really how you should look at it. It's like every single document tells the admissions counselors a story of who you are and makes them want to admit you. I told this story before, but another one of my clients, and you guys are gonna hear me talk about my clients at all because all the time, anonymously, of course, but I've worked with a lot of clients. Like I did 3 application masterminds and it's 20 people each already. So that's 60. Last cycle, I had over 40 like clients who I reviewed their applications. My plat has like over 70. I have a lot of clients. And so trust me, I've seen some things, okay? And I can compare and contrast and I can see the differences and I know what works and I know what doesn't work. And I talk about this in my community all the time because I'm always implementing new things and trying new things. A lot of it also like just what I know about the legal field and seeing if it will work in the law school application space. And it does. And that's why I started implementing the networking piece, but that's not a conversation for this video. But the point is, so I had this client and I like completely lost my train of thought. Guys, what was I talking about? I don't even remember what I was talking about. I'm looking at my notes to see what I was talking about. It might come back to me. It'll come back to me. The point is, when you're going through, right, your writing process, when you're going through your application process, you have to make sure that everything is cohesive and that everything fits together. You don't want, like, for example, your personal statement to be contradicting something you're saying in your diversity statement or your optional statement or whatever it may be, right? To the best of your ability, everything needs to complement the other, right? And so I remember one of my clients, she had asked me about writing an addendum. And some of you are going to have addendums because if you have a low GPA, you're probably going to need to write an addendum. Some of you are going to have to write character and fitness addendums. Again, these are things that you should be aware of before the actual writing process so that you know you have to do it. So, and I remember she wanted to write this addendum about, she essentially wanted to say in her addendum that it was difficult for her she wanted to write an LSAT addendum, which I don't really like to begin with, but she wanted to say that it was difficult for her to like grasp like certain pieces or like something along those lines, but other pieces of her application just completely contradicted that. Like, oh, that's what it was, guys. That's what it was. She wanted to say like English wasn't her native language in her LSAT addendum, but other pieces of her application talked about how adept she was in her law firm job and mastering difficult legal concepts and translating them into a way that was digestible to her clients. And I'm like, those two things don't go together. You can't on one hand say English isn't your first language and so that's why you're not doing well on the LSAT, but on the other hand, expect them to believe that you were this adept at your amazing job and amazing at essentially conflating and conveying difficult to understand legal concepts to your clients. Like you see how those two things contradict, right? And that's a really simple example, but there are more minute examples of people contradicting themselves in their application materials or just in general raising red flags to admissions counselors. And then another example, I'm not going to use that example. Never mind. I just had another example come to my mind. But essentially what I'm saying here is you need to give yourself time to go through the entire process, right? Make sure that you are giving yourself time to study for the LSAT, giving yourself time to say like, hey, do I need character and fitness? Do I need an addendum? Who's going to be one of my recommenders? Am I building these relationships? Am I building relationships with the schools? Am I making sure I'm applying to the schools I need to be applying to? What are my weaknesses? What are my strengths? What am I going to be writing about? Like I could literally go on and on. And the point here is to give yourself enough time, especially because I know a lot of you guys work full time. A lot of my clients work full time. A lot of them are non-traditional. And even some of you who aren't, if you're full-time in school, you need time to go through every single piece and give it the time it deserves. And the longer you have to do that, just more than likely, the better you're going to be, or the stronger your law school application is going to be. And one more example here before I move on, or like kind of wrap it up to the next piece, because I've mentioned this before, and people are like always ask me like, Sephora, what's considered early, right? Because I always encourage people to aim to submit early in the application process. Again, like this just goes back to what I've seen, and does it matter? Does it not matter? Incremental advance, large advance, like who knows? That's not really the point. The point is there is less competition at the beginning of the cycle. And if fall 2025 didn't showcase that, then I don't know like what else could have showcased that. Again, like there was a couple of nuances, of course, with the fall 2025 cycle, given that it was the first time people were applying without logic games. So LSAT scores were a lot higher, and, tons of different things. But I still think in general, because again, even in 2024, even in 2023, right, when you're thinking about how the law school application process works, it is rolling admissions. It's rolling admissions, which means not in all cases, but in the majority of cases, or at least on average, the earlier you submit, the earlier you get reviewed, right? Again, if you're a huge splitter or reverse splitter, that may not be the case. You may get put on hold, or you just may not hear back until later in the cycle. But for the most part, law school is rolling admissions, which means they are reviewing applications on a rolling basis. And so if you're applying earlier in the cycle and they don't have that many applicants in yet, and you appear to be a very, very strong applicant, you are more likely to get that acceptance earlier on in the cycle, because you appear to be that strong. Well, not appear to be, because you are that strong applicant. LSAT score, application, literally everything, right? And what I was going to say was I see this in the fall 2025 cycle right now, because my clients who had worse, like still strong LSAT scores, but worse scores, who submitted earlier in the cycle, so September, October, are performing better than my clients with stronger LSAT scores in the 170s or higher 160s, who submitted in December and January for the same schools, with all else being equal. Right? With all else being equal, because I know all of their application materials are strong because they worked with me on it. So with all else being equal, those clients who submitted earlier were having more success than the ones who submitting later. And obviously, like, again, like no one can say like concretely like why someone gets denied or rejected or whatever. But with all else being equal, and the clients with the higher scores of applying later in the cycle, either getting rejected or not getting in. Again, not saying this is 100% the case like at all, but based on the fall 2025 cycle, those who submitted in September and October, it probably wasn't as clear to admissions counselors how competitive or how much higher the LSAT scores were going to be, because I think it came out maybe either at the end of October or in November or something like that, that LSAT scores were trending a lot higher, like 20+% higher, and applications were up like, like a huge percentage as well. And so then after they realize that, then they can be more picky, right? They can be more picky. And so then that does apply to those who hadn't already received acceptances in October, because my clients, not all of them, but a decent amount of them who submitted in September had acceptances already in October, right? And so that's what I mean. That's just one example of what I'm talking about. Outside other reasons why I just think submitting early is just beneficial, because if you're submitting at the end of a cycle in February, especially, right? First of all, that's probably a smaller chance that if you're a splitter or a reverse splitter, you're going to get in, because again, competition is a lot higher. There may be less money. Like lots of my clients have already received full scholarships and like half scholarships. And so don't really want to do that. You usually have to be very, 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 very competitive if you're submitting to a top law school in February, like at the deadline. Okay. You usually have to be very, very competitive. Now, all of that is to say that you're not sacrificing a strong application for the sake of submitting early. You need a strong application when you're submitting early, right? And so if you're weighing like, do I submit early or do I get my application up to par, you get your application up to par. The point here is start now. Ideally, you had started in January, but the point is start now so that you are ready or close to being ready to submit earlier in that law school application cycle. I spent longer on that than I wanted to. Just to recap, I covered like the things that you don't want to be doing. So you don't want to be waiting until you get your LSAT score to start your process. And I talked about the different things, why you need to be incrementally working on things and adding things in. You don't want to put overemphasis on the LSAT and de-emphasize everything else. The LSAT is super important. It is the most important, but everything else matters, especially if you've got big law, clerkship, etc. goals. You need to view the application process holistically. So that's, how does my entire application present me as a strong law school applicant to admissions counselors? You don't want to underestimate the amount of time you need for the LSAT or for the writing portion. And I believe I briefly mentioned this. You don't want to burn out. So many people treat it like a sprint and they're like 20 hours, 25 hours, 30 hours of LSAT studying per week. And they're like, I'm going to choose my law schools now. And I'm going to do this now. And I'm going to do this now. I'm going to get the recommenders. I'm going to do all of these things now. Don't do that. You'll burn out. Again, do it over time, right? Treat it like a marathon and give yourself time to do these things and to do it right. So those are kind of like all like your not to do's. And then jumping into a little bit, what you actually do need to do is, number one, you need to create a realistic timeline. A lot of you guys work full time. A lot of you guys have like just different things going on in your life. Majority of my clients, like I said, are either non-traditional or work full time, or they're full-time students. And so they have other things going on. And so what that ends up meaning is, you're creating a schedule, and I have all my clients do this. You're creating a schedule that works around what you have going on in your daily life. And then slowly, like right now, you're adding in piece by piece the application prep pieces, right? You're piece by piece, you're adding in the brainstorming, you're identifying any weaknesses, you're choosing your recommenders, you're doing the networking, right? You're doing all of those things. You're adding those things in piece by piece. Okay. The next thing is, I said that. The second thing was adding things in incrementally. The third thing is monitoring your progress. And this goes not just for LSAT, but it's also really, really important to be tracking how you're scoring on the LSAT. So make sure you're taking LSAT practice tests and keeping track of how you're doing so that you know if what you're doing is working, but also monitoring your progress to make sure like, hey, am I on track to submit in October? Am I on track to submit in September? Am I on track to submit in November? What I have noticed on average is for the application materials, after you have a strong understanding of like the application prep pieces, so what your weaknesses are, what your strengths are, et cetera, the application writing process, including the brainstorming, outlining, writing, and actual revision process, on average is about 4 months, which is usually why I suggest people start that process in May. Because some people, for like some of my clients, it's actually a 6 or 7 month process, because they're writing multiple optional statements, or they're doing different things for multiple schools, or maybe they're just not that strong of a writer, or maybe they're struggling to come up with topics, or whatever it may be. And so again, don't underestimate the amount of time you need for the writing process, especially, and don't like throw anything to the side, like at all. If you're watching this, then you're early. If you're watching this live, then you're early enough. And if you're watching this later, then depending on when you're watching, you still got enough time to make sure that you set yourself up for a successful fall 2026 application cycle. So that's everything that I wanted to talk about today. I'm going to be going into a lot more detail what I covered today this coming Tuesday. What's Tuesday's date? Is it like March 4th? No. Wait, yes. Tuesday, March 4th. I'm going to be going much more into detail into like what your timeline should look like, and what you want to be doing, and when you want to be doing it, and how to make yourself stand out for the fall 2026 application cycle. So it's the How to Use Law School to Change Your Life masterclass. Your ticket is $47. So if you haven't gotten your ticket, you can purchase it for that. But also very, very important. And it's very important because we are almost full. I believe we have like 30 spots left in our application mastermind. So the application mastermind is coming up in May. The application mastermind is where you will be working with me live on all of your application materials. So this is the brainstorming, this is the outlining, this is the actual drafting. I work with you on that process live. So those are the two things that you kind of want to look into and get done, and kind of set yourself up for a successful law school application cycle. Is this Tuesday, we have our upcoming masterclass. And then again, we've got 3 or so spots left in our application mastermind starting in May. I think that's it. And I told you guys at the beginning of this, I had ordered Uber Eats, which just came. Well, it actually came while I was doing this live. But yeah, what you guys should be thinking about now for the fall 2026 cycle is, again, making sure that you've got that timeline in tow, making sure that you've got a schedule, making sure that you're setting yourself up for success for whatever your goals may be, right? For whatever your goals may be, so that you can get into law school and get the law school job, or I should say attorney job, that you want to get post law school. Okay. Let me see. I actually don't see any questions in the chat, and that's a first. So if you guys don't have any questions, then I hope to see some of you guys in our masterclass on Tuesday, our live masterclass. It's at 8 p.m. Eastern. It will be recorded. So as long as you have a ticket, you're going to get access to that recording. So you don't have to worry about that. And then hope to see some of you guys live in our upcoming application mastermind in May. And right now I'm just rambling, but still not seeing any questions in the chat. So I'm going to let you guys go, and I'm going to go as well. Go eat some dinner. If you guys have any questions, you can always shoot us an email at contact@toppingthecurve.com. Bye.